The overarching reason why governments around the world lie to their citizens regarding a non-human intelligence engaging our world is selfishness. With very few exceptions, if you are to examine and analyze the litany of reasons people have come up with why governments lie to us regarding UFO reality, a common thread running through all of those reasons is selfishness. Before I give you the number one selfish reason why governments lie to their citizenry regarding UAP reality, I'm going to provide you a number of reasons for the cover-up that was given by journalist George Knapp days after the December 16th, 2017 bombshell article was published, titled "Glowing Auras and Black Money, the Pentagon's Mysterious UFO Program." George Knapp has serious connections with government insiders regarding this subject. So his assessment on this, in my opinion, should be taken with more than just a grain of salt. On December 21st, 2017, he had the following to say on Phenomenon Radio program. "There are people inside government now who are freaking out about this, who are opposed to the release of the UFO information. Not necessarily because they worry about the public going crazy, buying guns and blowing up all social institutions. That might be a concern. But because they worry about their own culpability, about the lies that they have told, about money that's been stashed into secret programs that should have gone somewhere else, about the taxpayers getting outraged." Knapp goes on to explain, "There are a range of motives for why people don't want this disclosure to happen. Some are worried that they are going to go to jail. Some are worried that it's the devil. Some just don't want the public to know, or they've got friends in industry, or they're worried that the Russians and the Chinese might find out what we're up to. There's a range of reasons." Let's analyze some of the reasons George Knapp provided us regarding why the U.S. government lies to its citizens regarding the reality that we are not alone in the universe. Now, granted, he was giving reasons why some government officials were freaking out about the December 16th, 2017 New York Times bombshell article, but I think his reasons can be equally applied to why there has been a cover-up for so long and why government officials simply do not want disclosure on this subject matter. Knapp stated they worry about the lies that have been told. I think when he says they, he's referencing the very few officials within the United States government that deal with the UFO subject. And when he's referencing those lies, I don't think he means just lies to the American public, but also lies to other members of the United States government that should have been informed regarding what's going on regarding the UFO subject, not the least of which would be the United States Congress. Recall that the Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, the number one individual within the entirety of the Department of Defense while he served, was apparently unaware of the ATIP study program. This equates to presumably him also being completely unaware of the potential threat that anomalous aerial vehicles presented to the United States Armed Services through all their incursions into highly restricted military airspace. George Knapp has relayed that Lou Elizondo indicated that he believed that the Secretary of Defense at the time, James Mattis, was intentionally being insulated from not only the ATIP UAP program, but their findings as well. This sentiment is further supported by this clip from Fox and Friends in which Chris Mellon recaps that him and Elizondo got in touch with two people that report up the chain of command to General James Mattis, and Chris Mellon and Elizondo were unable to get these two individuals to get the UFO data on the agenda of General James Mattis.
Let me mention in that regard that when Lou Elizondo, my colleague, was still in the Pentagon running the UFO investigation, I worked with him, introduced him to two individuals who are direct reports to General Mattis. We were unable to get that on the Secretary's agenda. Ultimately, Lou concluded and I concluded that the only way to make progress on this issue was from the outside, to take the information to the public and the Congress.
Now, Elizondo has stated that James Mattis is the kind of guy that wants more data and not less. So to me, him having apparently been insulated from the UFO investigation program and the data that they acquired is a violation to the national security interests of the American people. And quite frankly, I don't know how to look at it in any other light than that. It has recently been brought to light by journalist Billy Cox that John Kelly, former director of Homeland Security, former military assistant to 2 secretaries of state, former chief of staff for the Trump administration, and having served many years as a 4-star general for the United States Marine Corps, this individual was never read into UFO reality. That's not only incredibly unethical as far as I'm concerned, I would go so far to say that that is scandalous. When you consider what people within the United States government who have input on the UFO subject have been willing to do, how outlandish what they've been willing to do is, you have to ask yourself, what other crazy things have they implemented in this country? I mean, as I've stated, they kept the Secretary of Defense out of the loop regarding UAP. If you don't know, the Secretary of Defense is the number 2 person when it comes to commanding the United States Armed Services. The U.S. President would be the number 1 person. They've kept the Director of Homeland Security out of the loop. They've kept the military assistant to the Secretary of State out of the loop. They kept the former chief of staff for the Trump presidency out of the loop. They've kept 4-star generals out of the loop. They've kept Congress out of the loop. Each and every one of these people has an urgent, not just a need to know, I would go so far to say an urgent need to know when you consider how persistent UAP incursions are into highly restricted military airspace and how much further advanced they are than anything the United States has. F-35, F-22, it's like a slingshot compared to this technology. When you consider the fact that UAP do incursions into highly restricted airspace around nuclear silos and have been known to turn them off, creating an enormous strategic risk factor for the United States of America. But they've been known to turn them on. Usually they just surveil. So not only do all these high caliber government officials have an urgent need to know about this reality, but so do American citizens, because it affects American citizens as much as it affects government officials and as much as it affects anyone within the CIA or the Department of Defense, etc. This is incredibly outlandish. This is incredibly unethical and wrong and is a betrayal. It is a betrayal to the interests of the American people. Because there's no American who wants to be kept out of the loop of something of this level of potential influence upon their well-being. So what else has these individuals who have maintained and directed a policy of secrecy regarding UFOs, what other outlandish things have they been willing to do? Which brings us into George Knapp's statement regarding money being stashed into secret programs that should have gone elsewhere and taxpayers being outraged about it. I think that it is now close to certainty that there are multiple UFO study programs housed within the various branches of the United States military, and that there are other UFO study programs housed in the various intelligence gathering agencies of the United States government. And I reach this conclusion through simple arithmetic. For starters, we have all now been informed that contrary to what the U.S. government has been officially telling us for many, many years, the U.S. government does continue to study UFOs. And that revelation was made when we learned of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program that was directed by Luis Elizondo. We also now know Luis Elizondo's assessment and that of his former colleagues on what some of these vehicles are that have been encountered by the Navy. Luis Elizondo has been very transparent and said that him and his colleagues believe that some of these UAP are not originating from any military inventory in the world and are not coming from someone like Elon Musk. We now know that UFOs are real because the Navy officially validated them. The Navy didn't say where they originated, but the Navy was explicit that the vehicles that were captured in those videos are true unknowns. So, logically speaking, one of the first things that I would want to do if I would want to learn more about the flight capabilities and nature of those UAP that were captured on those videos is I would want to talk to the technicians that were on the Nimitz and the Princeton who captured the forensic data of those vehicles using their advanced tools. I would maybe want to also talk to the person who filmed the Tic Tac on November of 2004, a pilot named Chad Underwood. Maybe I would also want to talk to Top Gun pilot David Fravor, who says he got within a half mile of the Tic Tac. Maybe I would want to talk to all the other aviators that were there with him, who all are consistent in that they believe that this vehicle does not stem from any military inventory in the world and was operating on a physics that is not yet understood. And by the way, when Fravor encountered the Tic Tac, the visibility was perfect. He had 3,600 flight hours. He was the commanding officer of the VFA 41 Black Aces. He did a lot of combat missions overseas. He's as qualified as you're going to get, and all the other aviators agree with him. And these aviators were in two different angles in the sky, two aviators in one angle, two aviators in another angle. They all say the same story. The radar technicians, they all coincide with their story that whatever was encountered in November 2004 is technology that is not understood, using a physics that is not understood. So now that we got that out of the way, let me ask you a question. Do you think there's only one organization within the United States government that's keeping a tab on the Chinese military and their intelligence gathering operations? Of course not. The CIA does that. The NSA does that. The NRO does that. The DIA does that, and on it goes, because it's extremely important for national security reasons to keep tabs on whatever the military and the intelligence gathering services of the Chinese government is up to. So let me ask another question. Considering the reality of UFOs and the capabilities of UFOs, do you really think ATIP is the only organization within the United States government studying them? Because if you lean in that direction, then I got some beachfront property to sell you in Nebraska. Well-connected investigative filmmaker Jeremy Corbell has gone on the record regarding his knowledge of other well-funded UAP study programs that are in existence right now. Here's what he had to say back in 2018. I will tell you this now, and I will be proven right later, but I will put it on the record now that there are multiple UFO programs going at this time that are not being named right now, and there are 4 in particular that will probably come out. Corbell's statement is corroborated by an article written by astrophysicist Dr. Bernard Haisch, who George Knapp has stated is well connected. Here's what Dr. Haisch had to say regarding the ATIP program. The shadowy program officially ended in 2012, according to the U.S. Defense Department, which has for the first time admitted its existence, but the New York Times has reported it is still up and running. Sources tell me that this is merely the tip of the iceberg, a group of 4 related but separate unacknowledged SCI programs tracing back to a 1947 Truman Memorandum still exists and were housed as of the 1990s in major aerospace companies such as, for example, Lockheed, TRW, Raytheon Aerospace Corp., etc. These would be expensive programs since the cost of secrecy could be several times higher than the research. The ATIP program has no relation to these 4 much better funded deep black ones. Indeed, the black programs collectively have budgets in the $10 billion range and up. Topics apparently include both reverse engineering and extraterrestrial biology. The ATIP did find the UFO crash retrieval program via official channels, but was denied access to it because the ATIP itself is not an SAP. Senator Harry Reid petitioned the DoD to confer special access program status to the ATIP, but the DoD denied his request. Now, I don't know if these UFO programs cited by Dr. Bernard Haisch actually exist, but what I can tell you is that I'm highly confident that there is no way that ATIP is the only program within the United States government studying this advanced technology. There's almost certainly other programs that are much more well-funded studying this very advanced technology that any military in the world would want to better understand. But what I can tell you, I'm also clear on, is that whoever these policymakers are that have kept this subject so secret, it was their bright idea to keep the Secretary of Defense and the Director of Homeland Security and the Chief Military Assistant to the Secretary of State and the Chief of Staff to the White House, 5-star generals, and the Congress, and on it goes, out of the loop regarding this subject. So because these policymakers are so outlandish, it wouldn't surprise me remotely if over the many years that they've maintained this secrecy behind this subject, that they at times took money that was supposed to go one place and put it into the black program studying UAP. And if they have done this over the years, then there's no question that taxpayers should be outraged at all the billions of dollars that have gone into these UFO study programs. They should be outraged for two reasons. For one, they didn't know their money was going there. Why would they not be brought into the loop? But for two, this money has been going into these UFO study programs, studying the phenomenon, all the while the U.S. government is telling the taxpayers keeping these programs alive that the phenomenon doesn't exist. This is why I am coining a new title for these policymakers. From this day forward, the policymakers surrounding the UFO subject should forever be known as the Outlandish Brigade. One of the reasons Knapp gave for the antagonism of certain government officials toward more transparency on the UAP reality is that they have friends in industry. That was his comment. And I think I know what he means by that. But before I get into that, I want to share a clip of Luis Elizondo telling the world that the U.S. government has debris from non-human technology in their possession.
So let me ask you one last question. Do you believe, based on your decade of serving in the U.S. government on this question, that the U.S. government has in its possession any material from one of these aircrafts?
I do, yes.
You think the U.S. government has debris from a UFO in its possession right now?
Unfortunately, Tucker, I really have to be careful of my NDA. I really can't go into a lot of more detail in that.
Okay.
But simply put, yes.
Here's an excerpt from a Richard Dolan article in which he interviewed Kit Green. And this excerpt encompasses some direct quotes from Kit Green, but also some commentary from Richard Dolan himself on what Kit Green had to say regarding special access programs. In fact, he added, all the SAP I've been part of except one are in that category. When I go to those facilities, there are no government employees. He did not stop there. Who thinks that governments have access to the highest technologies? Why would that be true when many of the people in the government aren't necessarily good physicists, biologists, geneticists, and so on? Other than nuclear weapons technology, he said, he could not think of any area within the defense community in which any government program could hold a candle to the trillion-dollar companies that employ the best scientists and engineers in the world. So why would anyone in the world think that the best tech normally comes from the government? Not only is most of the advanced technology research under development in the hands of private corporations, but the basic scenario is that the U.S. government serves as little more than a security organization working for those private entities. The impression I got from this is that the U.S. government has limited control at best over these programs. It provides the money, security, and valuable infrastructure, and that's about it. After the technology is ready for operational use, then it can be another story once the military services take delivery of a fieldable system. So let's assume that the United States government has black projects that are in the possession of extraordinarily advanced non-human technology that has somehow been recovered through excavation or through so-called crashes or what have you. If this is true, then these aerospace companies or aerospace company that has this technology may not want disclosure at all. And the reason for that is very simple. If you are a profitable company and you have a technology in your possession that could conceivably lead to an enormous array of derivative technology that you could patent and then put onto the market and make endless windfall profit from, you would want to protect that. And you would want to keep that as secret as you could until you could get as many patents as possible, so that when the time it became public that you were in the possession of that technology, it wouldn't matter, because you've already had acquired all these patents and you're in a position to make trillions of dollars. The thing about disclosure is, once disclosure comes, and if society finds out that it's true that black programs have alien technology in their possession, there might be a lot of pressure from scientific organizations and what have you, saying that a non-human created technology simply cannot be in the possession and ownership of a corporation, and that scientists and physicists and engineers all over the globe should have access to that technology to study it. And that's a really possible scenario that could occur in a post-disclosure world. So if you're a corporation and your model, which would of course be the model of any corporation, is to make as much money as possible, you may try to influence people within the Department of Defense that have oversight over you, which apparently is extremely limited oversight, but you may try to influence those people and say, look, disclosure is a bad idea for whatever reason, da-da-da-da-da. And so it is quite possible that one of the reasons that within the United States government that the cover-up has persisted for so long is because the corporate interests that have a lot of power and influence have somehow been able to convince people within the Pentagon that know about it to just keep it under wraps. This is highly speculative, but it is plausible in my opinion. So far, we've covered the following selfish motivations that the United States government potentially has as to why the UFO cover-up has persisted. We talked about how people involved in the policy of secrecy are worried that if disclosure happens, they will be held accountable and potentially even prosecuted for any illegal activity they engaged in, such as stashing money into UFO study programs that was supposed to go elsewhere. We've talked about how taxpayers might be outraged post-disclosure to learn that so much of their money has gone to UFO study programs, all the while the U.S. government is telling these taxpayers that would love to know and have an urgent need to know that there's no evidence that we're being visited by non-human intelligence. Another factor that we discussed is corporate interests that play a major role potentially in the cover-up, who have influenced the very small segment of oversight within the Department of Defense to continue on with the cover-up. But the question is, even in the most general sense possible, what advantage do governments possibly have to reveal to the public that we are being visited by an uncontrollable non-human intelligence that can do whatever it wants, whenever it wants? Robert Hastings was asked this very question in 2010 during a CNN interview. As you probably know, Robert Hastings is the premier expert regarding UFO visitations to areas that house nuclear technology. This is what Robert Hastings had to say on why there is a UFO cover-up internationally.
So the question remains then, I mean, this has been the subject of conspiracy theories for decades, as you referred to the Freedom of Information Act freeing up some of this testimony so that people can read it. What does the government have to gain by blanket denying that we've ever been visited by UFOs?
The RAND Corporation, which is a think tank, did a study for the Air Force in 1968. The Brookings Institution, which is a think tank, did a study for NASA in 1959, I believe, in which they said basically if extraterrestrials are here, governments have nothing to gain and everything to lose by admitting that without knowing the full intentions of whoever might be here. Are they hostile? We don't know. Do they intend some nefarious activities toward humankind? We don't. don't know. So basically, you know, the odds that the U.S. government is going to admit that there are craft flying around American airspace that run rings around our own aircraft, literally, and we hope they're friendly because we can't control them. And oh, by the way, they seem to be interested in our nuclear weapons and seem to be shutting them down from time to time. The government has everything to gain by keeping quiet about that.
My current assessment of the breakdown of the motivation behind the international cover-up is that 90% of the reasons governments have come up with to institute and maintain a cover-up fall under the umbrella of selfishness. 10% of those reasons fall under the umbrella of genuine concern for citizenry's well-being. Here's a quote by the late Stanton Friedman, in which he gives 3 reasons why there is an international cover-up. The first 2 of his reasons fall under the umbrella of genuine concern for citizenry. The last of his reasons falls under the umbrella of selfishness. This quote comes from the documentary Travis, the True Story of Travis Walton. I think every government in the world has 3 major problems along these lines with regard to UFOs. They'd like themselves to figure out how it works because it makes a great weapons delivery system, makes anything worth flying look pretty naive by comparison. You'd want to make sure that the other guy doesn't figure out how to duplicate their behavior because then you have a defense problem. If he's got something that flies like these things, we got a problem because we can't handle it. Perhaps most important, a kind of philosophical, political problem, as soon as it becomes obvious to the people on the planet and widely accepted that flying saucers are real and from off the Earth, there's going to be a push for a view of man as earthlings for people on this planet. Instead of I'm an American, Russian, or Chinese, I'm an earthling. There's no government that wants its citizens to owe their primary allegiance to the planet as opposed to the country. Nobody wants to give up their power. I think Stanton Friedman is on the right track regarding the impetus behind the internationally held UFO cover-up. Victor Marchetti, who spent many years within the intelligence world, has come to, in my view, essentially the same conclusion. He wrote an article in 1979 in a magazine called Second Look titled, How the CIA Views the Phenomenon. Here is an excerpt underscoring the psychological force in place that leads to all of the nations of the world that know we're not alone, essentially keeping that under wraps. Here's what he had to say. My theory is that we have indeed been contacted, perhaps even visited, by extraterrestrial beings, and that the U.S. government, in collusion with other national powers of the Earth, is determined to keep this information from the general public. The purpose of the international conspiracy is to maintain a workable stability among the nations of the world and for them, in turn, to retain institutional control over their respective populations. Thus, for these governments to admit there are beings from outer space attempting to contact us, beings with mentalities and technological capabilities obviously far superior to ours, could, once fully perceived by the average person, erode the foundations of the Earth's traditional power structure. Political and legal systems, religions, economic and social institutions could all soon become meaningless in the mind of the public. The national oligarchical establishments, even civilization as we know it, could collapse into anarchy. Such extreme conclusions are not necessarily valid, but they probably accurately reflect the fears of the ruling class of the major nations, whose leaders, particularly those in the intelligence business, have always advocated excessive governmental secrecy as being necessary to preserve national security. The real reason for such secrecy is, of course, to keep the public uninformed, misinformed, and therefore malleable. I think the best analogy for the UFO cover-up is actually Kim Jong-un's North Korea. Let me pose a question. Why do you think Kim Jong-un's government outlaws foreign movies? Why do you think Kim Jong-un's government makes internet access extremely limited and basically only available to foreigners and governmental purposes? It's pretty obvious the reason that their government does this is because they don't want outside influence, quote unquote, corrupting their populace. And obviously this is taken to an extreme level with the degree that Kim Jong-un's society is so closed. It's a black hole for information about the world. But he institutes this because he doesn't want his population to be corrupted by ideas stemming from outside his borders so that he can exercise the most full and complete control possible of his citizenry, the way they think and the way they perceive reality. I would argue that the UFO cover-up has a very close parallel. Governments don't want us to know we are not alone because they fear the influence this knowledge could have upon human psychology, not just in the short term, but also in the long term. I cannot come up with any other reason. Every nation on this planet that has forensic data that we are not alone has chosen to keep it under wraps. So to me, this is the number one reason there is a cover-up. It's fear. And it's not fear because governments love their citizenry, unfortunately. It's fear because governments don't want to lose power. They don't want to lose their capacity to control their citizenry and to influence their citizenry as they see fit. But, as a human being and as a citizen of this world and of the United States of America, which is an amazing country, I would say that I don't care what governments want. I want free will. And I think every human being on this planet would agree that free will is paramount. And when you play this charade where you censor a fact about reality, now we are not alone in the universe, you are taking away my free will, you're taking away the free will of my countrymen, and you're taking the free will away from every human being on the face of this planet. I don't care that psychology of humanity may change to some extent if we know we're not alone. I care about freedom and righteousness. And on every level, it is unethical to keep this charade going. It's 2020. This nonsense needs to be over. We are not alone in the universe. There is forensic data held within the American government that proves we are not alone. And lying to citizens of something of this weight is inherently wrong. Now, I don't know to what extent human psychology is actually going to shift when officialdom accepts that we are not alone in the universe. I suspect governments are paranoid and they have fears that far outstrip what's going to happen in reality. But nevertheless, it's that fear that is the number one psychological force holding the glue together of the international UFO cover-up. Now, I don't know if there is a God. But if there is a God, I highly doubt the creator of the heavens and the earth would have the will that governments on planet Earth lie to their citizenry about something that creator created. And if there is no God, and we are all just the outcome of chance, then I would argue that it goes against the natural order of things to create this environment where lies about basic facts of our universe flourish. So whether there is a God, whether there is no God, you are going against the fabric of reality by holding this cover-up in place, as far as I'm concerned. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you'd like to support this channel, you can check out my merch shop where I sell t-shirts. Link is in the description below, or you could even become a patron. Or you could just slap a like on this bad boy and I'll appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.